Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob Kepford, and today I'm going to talk about Drupal 8, and specifically from more of a site builder's perspective, more of just covering what's new in Drupal 8 and kind of what you can do out of the box without installing anything extra. I'm a senior web developer at Media Current, and we do Drupal for companies. We do complete site builds, consulting, and anything related with Drupal pretty much. Some interesting stuff we're working on now is we're doing a lot of work with the Weather Channel. There's some cool stuff going on there. I'm not working on that project myself, but a lot of interesting front-end stuff and just really big architectural stuff with Drupal and AngularJS and things like that. But that's where I'm from. You might have heard of the Weekly Drop. It's a email newsletter that goes out every week, and I'm the guy behind that. So if you want to keep up with Drupal and just get like an email once a week with kind of the highlights, and a lot of Drupal 8 resources are in there every week, a lot of just general information about the Drupal community as well as tutorials and stuff like that all get basically summarized and put into an email form. And so it's free. We don't spam you. And so check that out. I'm from California, and I'm not from the San Diego area. I'm from north of here, close to Fresno. And you've never heard of the town I'm from, I'm sure. It's called Carruthers. Anybody in the Central Valley has seen this landmark. And this is how you know you're on the way to Carruthers. It's hard to get there on accident. You kind of have to be. So I'm not from a big city or anything like that, and I enjoy the small town. But that's a little bit of where I come from. I've been doing Drupal since 2006. And it's a really fun community, as you guys know. And Drupal has really progressed a lot since Drupal 5, which is kind of my introduction to Drupal. So Drupal 8 has been, I think, one of the most controversial Drupal releases that's been developed, in my opinion. But I think as it comes closer to a beta, a lot of the concerns that people are having are being mitigated, and there's a lot of cool things to be excited about. Most of the things that are kind of controversial with Drupal 8 are on the back end in code architecture, object-oriented programming, different library decisions, and things like that. And we're not really going to be going into that. We're going to be talking about more of the user interface of Drupal and how, as somebody that's building a site with it, what you're going to encounter. So let's cover what's new in Drupal 8 at this point. We're at Alpha 8 right now, and I think there was I haven't went through like the changelog on Alpha 8 yet, but some cool new things that are listed. If you go to Drupal.org /Drupal-8.0, there's a really nice kind of landing page that covers like just like a broad view of what's new. And so this is basically, I'm going to cover most of those things. So there's a lot of additions in the fields API. So there's new fields added. HTML5 is more, it's not just a buzzword in Drupal now. It's actually more of the elements and things from HTML5 are implemented in Drupal. A lot better content editing in Drupal 8. The display modes that Drupal 8 provides and the way to manage them is a lot better in Drupal 8. Things that you used to have to do with contrib modules or in code are now able to do in the UI. Drupal 8 is a lot more mobile friendly as a developer or somebody building sites. It's set up it's not perfect. There's still places where things need to be improved upon, but it's a lot better. Views is in core. Accessibility issues have been addressed. Again, there are still accessibility issues there, but it's really came a long way. Language support, multilingual support is greatly improved in Drupal 8. It's not an area I have very much experience in, but about how bad it was before. And actually, Drupal's probably one of the best CMSs for handling multilingual sites. But Drupal 8 it's a huge improvement from what I understand from people that work with that aspect of Drupal. Probably one of the biggest improvements in Drupal 8 is CMI, or configuration management. And so basically like that is just a huge leap forward and going to make developing Drupal sites a lot less of a pain. and then web services. And we're not going to talk about web services, but it's there, and it's a huge bonus on Drupal just to have that out of the box set up to work with web services like, XML, JSON, things like that are just out of the box. Nodes can be created and can be read using these different services. So there's just stuff built into Drupal. So now if you need to extend Drupal use it as a backend for an iPhone app, there's a lot less work you have to do than previously. You could already do it. People do that now with Drupal 7, but it's going to be a lot easier to do in Drupal 8. So the big thing that I want to talk about is building a blog with Drupal 8. So there are some new improvements. So comments are now fields. So that's a big plus. So now you have all the power you have in the field API with comments, and there are a lot more you can do with that. New field types, entity references in core. The link field is in core, email, telephone, and as well as all these new fields, HTML5 placeholders are implemented. So, which is nice. If you've ever went to a site that's well done, you'll see placeholders in your text boxes. And so now that's just in the field API. You can do that. You don't need to write any HTML to do that or a custom module. So a lot of improvements there. On the HTML5 front, new elements have been added to Drupal that are HTML5 elements. So the picture element, which is great for responsive images, the date element, the email element, and the phone element, which all really improve the mobile experience. So if you've ever used a mobile website or an app, and when you're on your smartphone, it'll give you a custom keyboard. And so that's just one of the benefits of having these field types in core, is that you don't have to do any extra work there. You don't have to install any extra modules. So our sites that we build for clients are going to be better just because we're able to do this, and a lot less, people can depend on these things when they're writing a custom module. They don't have to write a dependency. Well, we want to use this. It's already in core, so it can just be assumed that the site will have it. And so I think as people have concerns about Drupal 8 becoming bloated, that is one other aspect of it is, well, you can depend on this being in any Drupal site, so it opens up a lot more possibilities. So another complaint about Drupal has always been, especially when compared to something like WordPress, has been WYSIWYG. Like, why isn't there a WYSIWYG editor in core? And so now there is, and it's CK editor. I know that this is an area where people are very opinionated. I personally hate WYSIWYG editors, but almost every project, it's a requirement. So just having that decision there and a default made, in my opinion, is a really good thing. And CK editor is a really, really good editor. TinyMC is also another good one. And it's usually those two that are the competing ones. Other additions to content editing, in-place editing. And I'm going to show all these in a demo here in a second. Inserting images inline within the WYSIWYG editor, which is a common request that we get all the time, and can be, depending on the requirements, can be a pain. So that's in core. Another feature, which is probably my wife's #1 complaint about Drupal on her blog, was the save as draft. The whole Drupal way that was handled in 7, and any Drupal version of published and unpublished. If you want to create content, you have two choices. It can be published or unpublished. You can't save it as a draft. Well, you can, but you have to just click a box that says unpublished, which makes no sense to someone who's not a Drupalist. It's just not intuitive at all. And so the content editing experience in a lot of ways has been improved, borrowing ideas from user experience talks, things that WordPress has done and other web frameworks have done, and it's a vast improvement. So this is the CK editor, and I'm going to just show real quick inserting an image. And so you can see kind of what that window looks like. You can add a caption, and it's just a standard WYSIWYG, but as you can see, like, the interface is just a lot more laid out well. So instead of everything just being a single column, everything is broken down into 2 columns. All of your secondary menu items are on the right. You can view source. So if you're familiar with CK Editor, this isn't anything new, but it is pretty cool. save as draft, save as published. You can unpublish it. So instead of a checkbox, which is the way Drupal 7 was now, we have a button. And it always seemed to me like, well, that's not a big deal. But if somebody who's only experienced using Drupal is to log into the website and edit a page, that is Drupal to them. This is why people say they hate Drupal that aren't developers, is because their only experience with it is this. And if this experience leaves a bad taste in their mouth, that's bad for Drupal as a whole. And so spending the time that has been spent on this has been a huge win, I think, for Drupal in the long run, and going to mean that we all can continue doing the kind of work we do now in the future. So it's not as cool as web services or config management, but it's important. Another cool thing, this is the basically inline editing. So if you're on, this is the home page, you can just click a little button and start editing a node right there without leaving the screen, without leaving that page. I personally would never request this as a feature, but it is pretty cool. And because in my opinion, it's kind of like very similar to like the whole overlay kind of way, that the overlay module, which also was removed. So anybody that hates that module and always disables it, now you don't have to. But it's a cool feature, inline editing. Another one, this one is form displays and display modes. So let me real quickly, how many of you would consider yourself Drupal developers who write modules and that kind of thing? How many would consider yourselves maybe designers or themers? Site owners, decision makers? Okay. So that's probably most of you are familiar with form, like the display mode kind of thing in Drupal. So typically, if you wanted to customize this, you would have to either install a module or write a little. It's not much code. It's like a hook info entity alter or something like that, I think. So this is just built into core now. So you can customize entity forms. You can create and manage view modes for all entity types just in core. So there's no longer a need for entity view modes module. And if you're not familiar with view modes, you should be. If you develop Drupal sites, this is an area that you should very much research and figure out, because it's not hard. But if you're building views and things like that and using the fields to display your content in a view within views, your life sucks if you have to theme that, because every view is going to have to, the templates need to be overridden. So view modes are a huge improvement on that. You can basically use the same kind of template and the same kind of layout. I'm not going to go into not enough time to talk about that much, but you should definitely research this if this is not something you're that familiar with. And so it's a big improvement. So on mobile, all the themes in Drupal core now are responsive. Yes.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Nodes? Are they smart enough not to load fields that aren't required by the view from the database?
I'm not sure about that. I think so. It's basically a view mode is so they're in. You already know them. They're default and teaser.
Yeah.
Right. That's what they are.
Right.
So.
In both cases, an entire node object is loaded.
Yeah, I would say it would be the same.
Field attached load, you get all the fields.
I would say it's the same. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into it.
Whereas in views, it doesn't. It only loads the fields that you request.
I don't know. That's interesting. I need to look into that actually. Thanks. So mobile responsive themes. The selling point in Drupal, all the themes are responsive. I mean, but there's like 2. So, but that's better than 0. So 7, the admin theme is responsive, as well as Bartik, and they basically just ditched the rest of the themes, which is what they should have done. You know, we've been carrying along Garland and these other themes for a long time, and nobody uses them, or no one should use them. We should say people do use them. That's why they need to be removed. So the admin theme is now mobile friendly, and I've got some excuse me, screenshots sprinkled in here of the admin theme on a phone, and you can actually do quite a bit on your phone in the Drupal interface now in Drupal 8. Like it's pretty cool. I mean, it's still on a phone. Like so, I would rather have a bigger screen and a keyboard myself. But if you needed to edit stuff and do stuff on the fly, you can do it. You're not going to hate your life like you do currently with most Drupal sites if you have to do stuff on a phone. And there's there's just so much that's been improved in the user interface. So probably one of the things that most of us got most, I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this. Getting views in core was, I thought, probably one of the biggest wins, because it just, everyone, that's the question. A new person comes to Drupal, they're like, first of all, you explain to them how it works, but then you tell them about views, and everyone uses views. There are exceptions. There are things, performance issues with views, of course, in certain situations, and there are sometimes when it's probably not the best thing to use, but that's very much an edge case in most situations. So it being in core means, like I said before with these other things, that everything can basically work the same. So everything in Drupal core can use views now if they need to list content. And that's what's been happening in development of Drupal 8 is different lists of content have been replaced from the custom code they were before to now being views and been rewritten. And so now modifying the default core, like for example, yeah, like example is like the content edit page, like that lists all your like admin/content. That is a view, which a lot of people have viewed. There's just several modules that you can override that view and do that, but now that's just in core. So if you want to customize it, it's just one less module you have to install. It's a more standardized system to do this. If everyone uses views, we should just have it in core. And it also means that the contrib modules can depend on it because it's going to be in there. So not much has changed with it. So there's not a lot to talk about. There's just very minor differences on the front end between views in 8 and 7. It's basically views 3. There is an embed display, which I'm not. I was trying to research to see where that actually came from. If that was there's a contrib module that allows you to do the same thing, but I don't think they shared any code at all. So entity reference display, because entity reference is in Drupal core now, which is another module that we use on almost every project. To be able to link two different entities, like say a user and a node, or two different content types to each other in a relationship. So if you're doing Drupal 7 right now, unless you could have some specific reason, you should pick entity reference, because that is that's what we're using in Drupal 8. So, all right. So the configuration API is probably the thing I've been most excited about with Drupal 8. How many of you have used the features module? All right, so if anyone doesn't know, features is a module that was developed by a company called Development Seed a few years back, basically to package up functionality in a Drupal site into a feature that could then be shared, could be put into revision control. It's kind of the thing that we should have been doing all along, but Drupal just goes a long ways back. Configuration is stored in the database primarily, which is not the best thing. It makes doing the whole dev stage and prod, workflow very hard and very problematic and very error prone. And so there was an effort made to basically put everything into code. All configuration is now in code, and this has also been a frustrating thing because it's still very much alpha software at this point. So I tried doing a demo on this at Drupal Camp Atlanta, but I decided I would save myself the embarrassment and capture screenshots ahead of time in a controlled environment. So I'm going to show you just kind of overview of what the configuration API is. So originally, the configuration API was basically export all the configuration from Drupal into a single directory, and that is it, and like import it. And people were saying, we don't need features module anymore. And I was like, hold up, we do need features or something like that would package it up into meaningful chunks of configuration. So we really don't want to have to just export all of our configuration out into a single directory or single file and then import it into another site. What if we just want to change this blog part? We just want to change a field name, or we just want to change a label or something like that. So that was, kind of the idea was, well, features module for Drupal 8 will basically add that on top of the configuration API. But the configuration team basically decided we're going to provide a UI for importing and exporting single features, basically like a blog content type. So first off, I'm getting ahead of myself. full export, full import. So the way it works now is you go configure your site, and then you can go to the development part of your Drupal admin, and you can basically just export your whole site's configuration. And it makes it in a little tar zip file, and so it's just a bunch of flat files that are YAML files, which I'm going to show in a second here. So just that fact that it's not in the database, although we'll talk about that in a minute. It's not in the database. The configuration is not stored in the database. It's stored in flat files. So key value, I believe it's basically YAML files, which is like a key value store. So that is huge because that just means you don't need the features module, which is trying to do a very hard task. And so I'm very much looking forward to building Drupal 8 sites as soon as possible just for that aspect. So like I said, single import and export. So say you don't want to export your whole site's configuration because it doesn't make sense, because maybe you just built this one thing and you want to share it with another site that you're working on, and you just want to export the content type in the fields and maybe a view or two. Well, that has been added in like maybe the last 3 months, I think. And so you can select a configuration. So node settings, and you can kind of see, it's kind of hard to see actually, but you can see the different configurations that are possible. Basically everything that is configurable can be exported as a YAML file. And so import works very similar to like the way views import and exports work. So you can just paste in configuration and import it, and your site will basically, just the same way like if you would import and export a view. There was a couple of contrib modules that do this for content types as well. So super powerful. So I think I have this slide out of order, but synchronization. So basically, like if you import, let's come back to that actually. All right, let's talk about directories real quick. So where is all this code stored? When you install Drupal 8, if you don't set it up ahead of time in your settings.php file, it will basically create a configuration directory, which is in the files directory. And then there'll be 2 subdirectories below that, active and staging. And active is your active configuration. So every time you change something on your Drupal site, it gets that file, configuration file that applies to your change will get updated in the file system. And so when I first heard this, I thought, why in the world would you put configuration in the files directory? But the nice thing is, like, and I'm still not clear on why that's what's needed. It may be, I think it basically comes down to that we're on so many different platforms that is really the only way we can guarantee that it will actually work on these different servers, setups, and configuration. And if you know what you're doing, you can go into your settings.php file and say, I don't want it to live in the files directory. I want it to live outside of my doc root. I want it to live wherever on your server you want it to. As long as the server has permission to write those files, that's fine. So that's the nice thing. So it'll work, but then you can configure it. And so, like I said, you have active and staging configuration files. So your active is what you're currently using. Your staging is just that. So if you wanted to drop some new files into staging, and then you come back, I think I got my slides out of order here. You go to this page, synchronization. And then you can basically go through each thing that's changed. So for example, in this example, say the toolbar breakpoint is changed. I can put the new configuration file in my staging, and then I have the same file except a different version of it is in active. And so if I click view differences, it'll actually show me the diff. And in this example, it's just the UUID, but you get the idea. It's very similar to the diff module for features. It's going to show you the difference. Or obviously you could do this with version control. And there are many different ways you could configure your setup. It's very flexible. But like I said, if you try to do it now, you're probably going to hit a few errors because there's so much changing outside of the configuration management at this point that those changes from alpha to alpha have been breaking. There's just no way that it's going to work perfectly until we get to probably a beta. But the architecture is pretty sound, I think. So what are these files? Here's an example. They're YAML files, which is very similar to XML or JSON. It's just a key value store, but it's very readable. So no longer are you looking, say, for example, features module would export it as PHP arrays. So this is much easier to read. You could actually go in here and just edit this file, which is what I'm foreseeing a lot of us start doing with configuration. And once you've read enough of these and you kind of know what different parts mean, I mean, I do that with features sometimes. I don't even go into the UI. I just go into the array and I know where the thing is and I change it. So this is just, I mean, going to solve there's so many modules that this will knock out that aren't needed anymore. Just being able to do this. So big win for Drupal. And so your Active Directory basically has all your YAML files in a structure like that. All modules, like so if you write your own modules, and we're not talking about that, but just for example, your configuration is in a YAML file. So they don't have to live in Active, they can also live in the module directory as well. Like if you write your own module, it doesn't go in here. So custom directories, settings.php file is a good file to read for Drupal 8 because there's changes in there. And so you can basically customize which directory that you want to store your configuration in. And they can be, like you could have active and staging in totally different trees. So in this example, I have it in a conf or config directory, instead of my doc root. So if you wanted to keep it in a separate repo, and this is a question I get every time I talk about this, is like, well, how is this going to work with revision control? Because my stuff's on Pantheon or my stuff's on whatever, Acquia. And that is a question that's not been answered yet because I think you can do a lot of different things and people are going to be experimenting and I'm sure there's a lot of different methodologies that are going to be applied to this and different ways to deploy things. But I think it's flexible enough that it's going to be pretty good. So that is it. The internet is pretty weak, and I could show you real quick kind of a real basic blog that I set up. I think most of us have seen Drupal sites. Not going to be too impressed with this, but the fact that I'm not using any contributed modules except the vel to just generate stuff should show you that, like, for the first time, I think people can actually build really robust Drupal sites with just core. I mean, I think if you were limited to no contrib modules, most of the sites I've built, I could build with Drupal core and maybe like some stuff in the theme. Obviously, you're going to have to write a custom theme or something like that. Very limited custom code could be done like in no contrib. I could write a couple custom modules and do most of what I've done on other sites recently. So like I have a view here that just shows recent posts and it shows the photo and the node title. This is different topics, or it's a tag vocabulary, it's a view. So just the views and the different field types really improve what you're able to do out of the box. So here's another example. Here's what it looks like on an iPhone 5. Let's say done. And there's a lot of things in Drupal 8 I didn't even discuss that are in like the UI. There's just too much to cover. But I think I'm personally very excited about Drupal 8, and I'm ready to like start using it. But I'd be interested to hear your questions as well as your thoughts, concerns about Drupal 8. So the floor is yours. Here's my obligatory info for Media Current, and if anyone's interested in needing consulting or work, you can talk to me afterwards. But questions?
Thanks for the presentation. One of the smoothest I've seen. I've been coming to CMI presentations at camps since bad camp 2 years ago, when I was just getting started. To see it coming together. So, our current workflow for deploying configuration changes, we make sure we're up to date locally with the features revert. We click around in the UI, make some changes. We features update, commit that to a repository, push it up, and then on the staging server, the demo server, whatever, we features revert, right? So you have the update, revert. So it sounds like now, you correct me if I'm wrong, there's no need for an update step because the Active Directory always contains up-to-date files. As soon as you click save in your configuration form, it's written out to the file system. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
So your update step is copy the file out of the Active Directory, and then your revert step is put that into the staging directory, and then in the UI, it looked like there was the synchronization page, right?
Yeah.
I didn't see it on there, but there's some button somewhere that says synchronize from staging or something?
Yes,
Okay.
there is, and I've not spent enough time with it. Every time I try it, I've had a couple successes with it, like months ago, but I'll hit an error here or there, and I think it's basically because of copying databases, and it's the UUID, and I need to get in like the IRC channel and just ask, like, what's the trick, or is it just buggy right now? Because sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. And I mean, one of the guys from Lullabot just did a video, and he had the exact same problem I had in the video. I'm glad he published it because I like it when people like show that they have problems too. So yeah, what you're saying is exactly the way it's supposed to work. I'm assuming that there may already be a drush command to do this.
Was gonna be the next
But
question.
yeah, if there's not, I'm sure there will be.
That's
There probably already is.
Yeah.
One thing I would say, like if you're going to try out the Drupal 8 in your developer and you use drush, get the latest drush from GitHub. I think it's the 7 or 8 branch. I can't remember. Whatever it is, it's the latest. It works perfectly with Drupal 8. Like it's the only way if you're going to mess with it. Because I had all kinds of trouble, and then somebody's like, "Hey, I think it was at a DrupalCon." So he's like, "Hey, you need to update your drush." So that's just a tip for anybody that's messing with it. The other thing you mentioned that I forgot to mention, you were talking about CMI, and I said it's all in the file system, but it's also in the database as well in a cache table. So all the configuration is actually stored in the database as well as in the file system. And this is, I don't totally understand. I've heard the explanation. Basically, I think it's a syntax error to avoid if like something happens in the file system that pages will still load properly. Like if there's, that's what it was explained. I don't understand like what situation would create that, because why are you committing?
I think surely you want the configuration in a database cache in order that it could be found quickly. Otherwise, the code's going to have to read mountains of YAML just to find some particular setting. It's got partial that stuff.
That was the other thing they said was
Whereas
performance.
in the database, it's going to be indexed. So
That's true.
Use them in cache.
Yeah. Any other questions?
What's the status of Drupal 8 as far as, is anybody actually using it on site?
Oh yeah, yeah. Was it Sensio Labs? I think that's the name of the company that's behind Symfony. So Drupal adopted most of the Symfony or a lot of the Symfony components. They are running their blog on Drupal 8. So there are quite a few people that are just bloggers, they're developers that are running Drupal 8.
So that's not crazy.
I think for them it's probably not crazy. I think it's gutsy and a good move. I advocate for it actually, but I will say,
There's no upgrade support though.
yeah, that's the problem.
So.
But if you're if you have guys on your team who are working on Drupal 8 core, like that are contributing to it and working on it every week, it might make sense. Also, I think there's an aspect of it is just good marketing to say we're running Drupal 8, like it's awesome. I actually think that's a good case for it if you have the resources and the will. But it's going to be work because every time I've done this presentation, I've just started over with the Drupal 8s because there's been like maybe a month or two gap, and so much has changed that there's no guarantee between alpha versions that you're just going to be able to get all the code and your site's going to work, because that's why it's an alpha. Betas are different, and then when we do full releases, it'll be much smoother. But it's been, I experienced no errors today messing with it. It's all the configuration API stuff that I've had problems with. And that's because, like I said, it's dealing with all the other changes. So if anybody changes anything away, like a configuration is done in the field API, well then, if they didn't account for that in the way they built CMI, then they're going to have an error there, and that's usually what happens. So, does that answer your question? Okay, cool. How many of you downloaded Drupal 8? Just curious. Has anybody went to a sprint or looked at any Drupal 8 issues?
I have patches.
Awesome. What was your name again?
I'm Joseph.
Joseph?
Yes.
Okay, cool. What's your user ID or username?
Joseph, HOSEF.
Okay. I've seen you at a camp before. I was just trying to remember. So. Oh, okay. Probably I was at Portland too, so it's probably it. Any other questions? How many of you are nervous about Drupal 8, especially developers? Because what I showed everyone today is not really that intimidating. It looks a lot like Drupal. It works pretty much the same way. On the back end, it's very different.
Yeah, I've actually worked with Symfony before, but how much have they brought in besides the YAML files?
Good question. I just started trying to learn some of how Symfony is. I know Guzzle, and I'm not sure what is actually Symfony and what is just something Symfony uses. So I don't
The
know.
router, so all the routing is done in, Symfony style YAML files instead of menu hooks.
They're using Composer, but I know that's not necessarily a Symfony thing. Symfony uses Composer, correct?
Yeah, I never used Composer. I did Doctrine. Did they bring Doctrine in, or
Yes.
so how does that
That's
work
recent,
with?
isn't it?
How does that work with like his content types? Like, does that mesh somehow? I don't know.
Yeah. Cool. There's a, I, say
Is
what?
that or
There was Doctor, you said, or there was something else?
yeah, Doctrine is I think the popular or oh, I used the previous one. I forgot what it was called now when I did. I worked on an older version of something like about 2 years ago.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think Doctrine is what allows them to actually parse comments in